Hi everybody, welcome to A Course in Miracles Applied. Today's topic is called How to Apply A Course in Miracles, a 3-act play. Before we begin with our topic, how to apply the Course into our lives, this is for all of you who are writers, who are storytellers, theater or movie people, readers, and lovers of story. This is not in the course, but rather something I've been thinking about on and off for a while, and this applies to my own journey and to observations I have made over the years. It's not anything that should be taken at face value or that this is 100% accurate. It's really not. It's just kind of a little bit of a playful way of expressing a process, and everybody has their own process. So we're talking about the upper chart, right above that white line. And that is kind of the 3-act play of our journey with the Course. Again, not to be taken 100% seriously, right? 99% is good. No, just kidding. Maybe 1%. So, if you have worked with the Course for a while, you might have noticed that some of the suggestions Jesus makes are nearly impossible to implement. At least that's my experience, right, over the years. At the very beginning of our journey with the Course, which I'm gonna call now for this segment Act 1, right? We think, when we read the Course, we think what Jesus tells us is relatively easy, right? At least it doesn't provoke a lot of resistance in us. We read the text and we're like, oh, okay, this is cool, this is nice, and it feels good, and we just read through it, and we don't really think about that hard about how to actually really implement what he's actually saying, right? Jesus, for example, talks about oneness, right? And we think we can just see everybody as one because we are in truth one, right? We don't realize at that point how deep our resistance against the experience of oneness reaches, right? How deep that goes. Because we have not yet uncovered the fear that prevents us from approaching that oneness. And once we have worked with the material for a while, we realize that there's more that meets the eye than the just what Jesus tells us, and we think it's relatively easy, right, in Act 1. Again, this is different for everybody, but I think in general, when we meet the Course first, we are in this honeymoon period when we think, oh my God, this is an amazing piece of work. And we read, I mean, I'm just talking about myself. I read the whole text in 4 days, and I soaked it all up, and I thought this is an amazing thing. I did not spend one thought about what it actually meant, right? That came like 30 years later, or a little later. So it becomes clear to us at some point, which is Act 2 of our journey, how much we don't want to think along the lines Jesus suggests in the Course. And that is, I think, when the actual work with the Course begins. But we can't skip steps, and we shouldn't skip steps. And as a general rule, I think that wherever we are on the ladder home, that is the most important rung of the ladder at this very moment, right? Each step is the preparation for the next step. Without that step, we can't go to the next step. And we can't skip any steps, but neither should we linger on each individual step for longer than necessary. I think as long as we don't believe the rung we're at is the highest rung, we're okay. And I think we can progress with the course. And Jesus says at some point, time is kind, and it will basically walk with you at your speed. So we begin our segment. We're gonna get to Act 3 a little later, but basically Act 1, really rudimentary. This is not right, but this is all I could come up with. Act 1 is that's easy. Act 2, no freaking way. That is the time when we have difficulty with the course because we think what Jesus tells us is impossible to implement. And Act 3 says, I can do this. And that is when we read Jesus's lines, and he will then become like a coach and say, you know what, you came so far, you can do this. I will get you through to the finish line, right? But it's different. We read the same sentence in the beginning. It's very different than when we read it after we went through this phase of no freaking way, right? Like Ken always said, hell no, I won't go. So the sentence we begin with, which gets us to the lower chart, it's in the course, in the text, chapter 14, section 2, paragraph 1. Section 14, chapter 2, paragraph 1, it says, you who are steadfastly devoted to misery must first recognize that you are miserable and not happy. The Holy Spirit cannot teach without this contrast, for you believe that misery is happiness. Right? So the contrast, I'm going to explain the contrast to you. When I realized what this contrast is, it opened my mind to kind of as a trickle effect going all the way back to the beginning of when I was starting to read the course and realizing what that contrast actually is that Jesus talks about. So what does this contrast have to do with how we can apply the teachings of the course to our daily lives? There are many passages in the course, right? Every page is filled with them. When Jesus asks us, as we have said before, something that's seemingly impossible to do. And this is so on purpose, right? Not so that we feel bad or feel ashamed or guilty in any way, that we can't do what Jesus tells us to do, but what he says can be seen as a guidepost for our own journey to work toward. Let's start with something seemingly small, right? A simple statement. The Course says in chapter 2, section 5, paragraph 10, it says, charity is a way of looking at your brother, looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time. Right? Seems logical. When we read it for the first time, we might think, oh, I can do this, right? We look at the person across from us on the bus, and for a moment we imagine that this person has already gone far beyond his current state of mind to a place of peace. We try this on a few people, and it seems to work, right? Not all the time, and not on everyone, but good enough, right? This is the Act 1 I was talking about. At some point, mostly in this phase, no freaking way, right? In the no freaking way phase. When we read this passage again after 5, 10, 15, 20 years, right? We realize that it's not so easy, right? right? It's not as easy as it appeared to be charitable in our mind with every single person, right? We can single out a couple, a few, but to be charitable, to apply this line, look at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments. If we try to apply that to somebody we don't like, a family member or an ex-husband, ex-wife, or something like that, we realize this is hard, right? Or it's impossible. So it's something we can aspire to, but it's not something that we can do at this very moment. At least not consistently, right? So in this graph, in this bottom graph, shows the principle that the Holy Spirit teaches through contrast. Whenever we read the course, right? Whenever we read anything in the course and apply what we have read into our daily lives, that's when we learn through this contrast. And this teaching happens in two ways. The first one is directly related to the quote that we just read before, that we must recognize we are miserable and not happy, and the Holy Spirit cannot teach with this contrast. So the teaching happens in the contrast between our misery and the joy of the Holy Spirit and the joy of the right mind. In that space between our misery and the joy of the Holy Spirit, that's where the Holy Spirit teaches us, right? Through that contrast, very drastic, stark contrast. The second way the Holy Spirit teaches us with contrast is the following. When we read the course, right, we read a line like the one we just read with charity, right? Charity is a way of looking at another as if he had already gone far beyond his actual accomplishments in time, right? We read this line, which is here. And then we compare it or contrast it to how we actually feel. And when we're in this act 2 of our journey, we realize that this is a big difference, right? Not all the time. Sometimes we can do it, but in 99% of our process with the course in Act 2, when our basic premise is no freaking way, Jesus, I'm not going to come to you, we will read the Jesus' teachings, which are up here, and when we are very honest with ourselves and compare his teachings to our current state of mind, we must realize there's a huge contrast, and that is our learning. We learn to go from here to here, right? That is our learning process. We can open pretty much any passage in the course and we will realize that this is at work, right? Current state of mind, when we read the line and the actual line, and then we must realize the contrast, and that is what we can learn. If we say, we can already do this, Jesus, and we think we're up here, there's no contrast, so the Holy Spirit cannot teach us anything. The course says, for example, in chapter 10, section 2, paragraph 2, it says, give up gladly everything that would stand in the way of your remembering. For God is in your memory, right? So if you first read the course and you first read that line, there's this like, oh yeah, this is great, right? I will give up gladly everything that would stand in the way of my remembering of God. That's in Act 1, right? Then we transform, or we transition into Act 2, and we must realize over time that absolutely not will I gladly give everything up that would stand in the way of my remembering of God, because I'm extremely afraid of God. I don't want to have anything to do with Jesus. I don't want to have anything to do with this course. I really don't want to do the course. I don't want to do whatever Jesus asks me to. No freaking way, right? So we learn our current state of mind in Act 2, if we're honest, right? It takes honesty to get there. If we're honest, we realize when Jesus says, give up gladly everything that would stand in the way of your remembering, we're saying, listen, buddy, I can't do it. There's no way for me to do this, right? I cannot give up everything that would stand in the way. First of all, I don't know what everything is. My individuality, I'm not going to give that up. My guilt, my shame, my fear, this world, my partner, money. We don't have to give up any of that, right? But we think we do, and we are terrified. And that terror that we feel when we realize how big the contrast is between the two, that's what Jesus needs. If we say, hey, Jesus, yeah, I'll give up gladly everything that stands in the way of me remembering you. He says, okay, fine, I'm going to watch a movie, right? He can't teach us if we're not saying, oh my God, I have no way of doing this. That is the honesty that Jesus needs, right? So between our current state of mind, very honest, and what Jesus teaches us, this contrast is what he needs. Here's another quote. And we could literally open any page to get to this. It says, nothing beyond yourself can make you fearful or loving because nothing is beyond you. When we're in Act 1, I remember when I read this line and I'm like, wow, nothing can make me fearful. That is awesome, right? Nothing is beyond me. That is awesome. And then we work with the course for 10 years. We come into Act 2 and we read this line again. And then it sinks in, right? That when we are upset about anything in the world, it is never in the world. And to implement that 100% every day to every situation is here. That's the end goal. Our task is to realize where we're at, right? Where am I with this? Jesus asks me and tells me nothing beyond yourself can make you fearful. And then the next morning I wake up and I'm afraid of a third world war, right? So my current state of mind is not what Jesus tells me he wants me to do. And I'm going to get to that later, but he does not want us to think that way. He wants us, because the most of the process in the course is in Act 2, right? When we say no freaking way. He wants us to realize that there's absolutely no way we can do what he asks us to do. He knows we're afraid of the world. We set it up that way, right? And it takes a very long and diligent practice to realize that the fear we're in has nothing to do with the world at all. It takes a long practice. And that contrast between what Jesus tells us and what we believe, that's what forgiveness is being applied to, right? Forgiveness is in this contrast. The forgiveness is not applied to what Jesus says, right? Forgiveness is applied to the space between how we feel right now and what Jesus asks us. That difference is what forgiveness is applied to. And forgiveness means to bring it to Jesus and say, you say nothing beyond yourself can make you fearful. And when I'm honest with myself in this Act 2, in Act 1, we think we're not afraid of anything, right? In Act 2, we realize very slowly when we come toward this end, that we're holy, you know what? we are afraid of everything. We're afraid of our brothers. We're afraid of whatever we want to pin that fear onto in the world, so that we don't experience the fear of what's inside, which is our guilt, and then the love of Jesus and the Holy Spirit. That's what we're afraid of. But the ego tells us, no, you are afraid of the world. And Jesus tells us, no, you're not afraid of the world. Nothing beyond yourself can make you fearful, because nothing is beyond you. When we're in this state, in this Act 2, we're slowly beginning to realize what that means when he says there's nothing beyond you. This body is nothing. This world is nothing. This individuality is nothing. And this is the most terrifying thought. When we get to this point of Act 2, towards the middle, towards the point of no return, as it is in the stories, when we have fully committed to the course and we're going this way, and we realize that nothing is beyond you, is the most frightening thought there is. Right? We're just not frightened here because we don't know what that means. It's a nice thought, right? We have no clue what beyond you means, right? There's another line in the text, chapter 3, section 6, paragraph 9. It says, only those who give over all desire to reject can know that their own rejection is impossible. Right? If we give over all desire to reject, that means if we don't reject anybody, then we will know rejection is impossible. Sounds nice, right? And then when we come here into this phase, we realize how much in our lives we actually reject. People, circumstances, tasks, thoughts. Which means we are rejecting ourselves. We can only reject somebody or something else if we reject ourselves because of our sin. Right? So that is the contrast of what Jesus tells us. If you don't reject, you cannot feel rejected. Compare it to where we are at the very moment when we realize we reject a lot of people. When we go to the grocery store, we go in the bus, we reject coworkers, we reject parts of our body, parts of other people's body. We reject parts of our lives, parts of the world, right? Because we believe in our own rejection, which is a projection of our own guilt. So, and that contrast between what we think right now and what Jesus teaches, that's what he needs. So when we read this line, right, only those who give over all desire to reject, and we pause for a moment and we think about it and we say, okay, am I giving over all desire to reject? Do I believe I cannot be rejected? That nothing in this world will give me any kind of upset? The honest answer is no. And that no freaking way in that second act, which is this contrast, that's what he needs. That's why he says this, right? That's why he says this line. He knows full well that we're rejecting everything and everyone, and including himself and God and the Holy Spirit when we're with the ego, right? The whole course is based on realizing how much we reject the obstacle, right? It's about the block. The block is the rejection of love. There's another quote. This is in chapter 14, the text, section 5, paragraph 1. This is a good one. It says, "Come gladly to the holy circle and look out in peace on all who think they are outside. Cast no one out, for here is what he seeks along with you. Come, let us join him in the holy place of peace, which is for all of us, united as one within the cause of peace. In Act 1, that's a beautiful, beautiful line, right? In Act 3, we believe, we start to realize this is a very profound, a really beautiful line, and I might have a chance in hell to actually get there. In Act 2, which is the majority of our coursework, we say absolutely no way. When Jesus tells us, cast no one out, he might as well say, lift off and fly 5 miles above the earth right now, right? Cast no one out. Ken did a really nice tape set on that, Cast No One Out. I recommend it very strongly. But it's impossible, right? Cast no one out. We go outside, we cast no one out. No one in our past, no one in our future, not our parents, not our siblings, not our exes, not our body, not our illnesses, not our problems, nothing. We must read this line and realize, come, let us join him in the holy place of peace, right? We can do it for one single instant, probably every 3 weeks. When we're good, that's it, right? If we're very honest, we must realize we cannot do what Jesus asks us to do, which is what he wants us to realize, right? When he says, come gladly to the holy circle and look out in peace on all who think they are outside, that means we're going in the subway and we judge nobody. We have no judgment about anything and anyone. We can do that, we think, in Act 1. We're like, you know what, we're all one. We're all one. That's it. Oneness is all there is, right? If we continue with the course, we will transition into the second act that says, no freaking way, man. We will shut the book, and if we don't shut the book, we will make it into something it is not, because we're very afraid of what the course actually says. And in Act 2 of our journey, we get to that point where we realize it, right? It's part of it. So when Jesus says, cast no one out, that's his teaching. And what he wants us to do then is to realize how much we want to cast out everything and everybody in the world, right? And that is what we bring to him. And that is the contrast he needs to teach us. Again, if we think, oh no, I'm not casting everybody, I'm not casting anyone out, we're here with him. Jesus, you're talking to my brother over there, not to me, because I'm not casting anyone out, right? He still loves us, but we can't learn anything from him. We're either at the very end of the journey, right, where we literally have no thought other than loving thoughts. But then we would also know that the one in the mirror that we look at in the mirror every morning is not us. We would have complete peace. There would be no pain, right? No sorrow, nothing. We would know we were home in God, and the love would be all-encompassing for every being, all the beings out there, which we knew they wouldn't be out there, they're all inside. As long as we're not there, we're most likely in the no freaking way Act 2, right? It's a comedy. It's not really a serious play. It's a dramedy sometimes. It's not a tragedy. It's really a comedy. Let's look at another quote. There's so many of them. And once you realize that, that's what the work with the course is, right? And then we can read one line and work for a whole week with one line. No problem, right? This one, for example. It cannot be that it is hard to do the task that Christ appointed you to do. since it is he who does it. In Act 1, we're like, this is great, right? I don't have to do anything. Christ does everything through me. Everything flows through me to the other person. We're all one, and it's all a beautiful, beautiful exchange, right? We might lay the course down and say, you know what, we don't really need it. We go to something else. But if we stick with it, we will transition into the second phase of our journey, which we will say to this line, when Jesus says it cannot be that it is hard to do the task that Christ appointed you to do, we will say it is freaking hard to do the task that Christ appointed you to do, namely to see your brother as sinless, to see everybody as sinless. We're like, no freaking way I want to do that. I want to stay an individual. I don't want to give up my individuality. I want to be Stefan, even if he's a little miserable. I want to be that person. That's this, right? We're here. Act 2. No freaking way. But Jesus says, when he says it cannot be that it is hard to do the task that Christ appointed you to do, which is to see our brother sinless, since he is the one that does it through you. This is his teaching, and then we say, okay, Jesus, all right, you gave me that line. Let me just write this down, how I feel right now. What do I feel about this line? I think it's very hard to do what Christ appointed me to do, namely to see everyone as 100% forgiven all the time. It is a very hard task. I cannot do it. Please help me. Right? Jesus, no freaking way. I don't want to do what you tell me. Please help me. And Jesus rejoices, right? If he would rejoice at that very moment. And he says, yes, you got it. This is why I wrote this course for you, he says. So you can contrast your current state of mind with my teaching and give me the difference. Look at the difference with me. And that is the whole process. If we wouldn't do anything else and we would open this book and we would read any line, right? And we would pause and say, okay, well, how do I feel about this? And we would realize the big contrast between us, our state of mind, and what the course says. That is the work with the course. That's it. The work with the course is not to do what Jesus tells us to do. It is not what the course is about. If we could do what Jesus would ask us to do, what would we need his course for? His course is here, right? This is his message. And we're down here. Our current state of mind is removed from this because this is the right mind, right? Where the current state of our mind is the wrong mind. And this contrast between the two is what heals us when we bring it to Jesus and talk to Jesus about it. So here's another thing that comes with this application, and that is what happens when we transition from here into this. We don't really want to transition. We want to stay in the bubble, right? In the Blisnini bubble. Ken always called it the Blisninihood, where we think everything is fine, right? We're one and everything is fine. It's a very normal state. It has to happen because we want to get in touch with all the principles in the course. It's a very important step, but we must not stay on each rung of the ladder. We must progress up the ladder. And the next step is to enter the no freaking way zone, right? Which is 70% of our journey. 72. So what could happen is that we read a line and we skip over we try to skip over this part and go right there and say, yes, we are with the Holy Spirit, right? We have made a decision for the Holy Spirit, right? I got it, Jesus, I got it. It isn't hard to do what Christ appointed us to do. It really isn't hard. I forgive everybody, right? I'm with the Holy Spirit right now. He tells me things. He tells me what to tell other people. He tells me all kinds of things about how the world works and stuff like that. And because I want to believe so hardly that I'm here, I want to skip this phase because it's extremely painful, right? I want to go right here. So I say to myself, and the ego cheers me on and says, I am with the Holy Spirit now. I've done it. I've made it, right? So the ego's goal for us is to never reach the point of decision making in our mind where we can decide against it, right? The whole channel, on the whole YouTube channel, is about that one purpose of the ego that gets us away from the decision making point in our mind where we can decide against the ego. That is the ego's goal. And the whole course is about us realizing that that's the ego's goal, right? And what better way for the ego to accomplish this than to tell us we're already there. We have already made it. We went from Act 1 to Act 3. This is now a 30-minute show, right? It's a sitcom. It's not a full-length movie. There's no midpoint. There's no character development. We're going from that's easy to, hey, this was easy, right? What better way for the ego to make sure its survival is 100% guaranteed than for us to believe, I skipped right over that. It was nothing, right? It's absolutely nothing. Who? So if we think we're with the Holy Spirit, that's fine, right? But it might be the ego telling us that we're with the Holy Spirit and we're not. We could be, because we're slipping from here, this gets too scary, we're slipping back to Act 1, right? So we're visiting Act 1 long. While we're in Act 2, we're going back to previous stages of development. Like children, when before there's a next breakthrough, usually we go back. So we might think we're with the Holy Spirit, when in fact, we're with the ego, and it feels good, especially if we don't realize, if we have not come to this thing, no freaking way, that if we have not penetrated the no to Jesus yet, this seems like a walk in the park. And Jesus walks right next to us. He gives us cold drinks, right? He gives us parking spaces. He gives us partners. He gives us money, a job that we wanted, right? Until we penetrate the no freaking way zone, which takes a certain decision, right? It takes a decision to not stay here, to say, you know what, Jesus, this is okay, but I still feel that pain inside and I want to get that healed. And that's the invitation to the Holy Spirit. And then he says, you have now entered Act 2 of your journey. Popcorn is on the right. Enjoy the show, right? So no freaking way is the process of the course. And it's, in the beginning, it's hard to say what comes from the Holy Spirit and what comes from the ego. The further you go here, the clearer we get when we're with the ego. We know exactly when we're with the ego, right? And it's painfully clear that we're with the ego in this state. And what we can do with this is, okay, this is what Jesus tells us, and this is where we are. And the contrast, the difference is what we discuss with him. Here's one last quote. Do not then be deceived in your brother and see only his loving thoughts as his reality, for by denying that his mind is split, you will heal yours. It's beautiful, right? It's very touching. And in the beginning of our journey, we're able to partially do this, right? Not with everybody, but with some people. Seeing our brother's loving thoughts, right? We can do that. Sounds lovely. And then we realize this doesn't last. I can't hold on to that thought. I can hold this thought that my brother, that I can see that my brother's loving thought. If I hate my coworker, maybe I can see his or her loving thoughts for 1 second. And then I'm right back in my ego and I'm projecting the hell out of this person, right? Like we all do. So the recognition that we're not really seeing our brother's loving thoughts other than fragments, that would be Act 2, when we say, no freaking way I want to see my brother as loving thoughts. I want to see my brother's hateful thoughts. Because if I see my brother's hateful thoughts, they are in my brother, not in me, which means I've successfully gotten rid of my guilt and I'm free as an individual. The ego is home free and I'm, for 1 second, safe from God. That this is not Act 3 becomes clear after a while when we work with the Course, right? We have to realize the ego will not give up easily. It's a drowning, the ego is a drowning person trying to pull us down so it can come up. Right? And Jesus says the ego is nothing, right? The ego is nothing. That's what Jesus says. And then we might try to think, yes, okay, the ego is nothing. So I have nothing to worry about. Why should I take the ego seriously? Why should I even worry about the ego if it's nothing, right? So we're skipping from this to this. But what Jesus actually wants us to do is say, just stop right there. Like Meatloaf said, I gotta know right now. And he says, just look at the difference. Look at this contrast. And that's what he needs from us, this contrast between the ego and our right mind. Between, oh yes, I can see the loving thoughts of my brother, which is here, and when we're here at the end in Act 3, when we can actually realize I can do this. It's going to take some time, but I can do this. With Jesus' help, I will make this happen. But we have to get through this second phase when we don't want to see the loving thoughts in our brother at all. Right? So here's the application that we can work with. If we read a line, let's say that previous line, give up gladly everything that would stand in the way of your remembering, right? We read the line, and I think for me, it was always helpful to read the Course with a person in mind, a person that we haven't forgiven yet, that we have an issue with, right? Because then there can be a direct application from what you read in the Course to our daily lives, right? If we read it abstractly, that's fine too. But for me personally, it was always very helpful to have one person in mind and apply the sentence that Jesus tells me. So in this case, we recognize that this specific grievance that we have towards this other person stands in the way of us remembering God, right? When Jesus says, give up gladly everything that would stand in the way, and we realize we have this person that we haven't forgiven, that there is this grievance that is actually standing in the way between me and me remembering God, right? So what do we do next? So if we can do what Jesus tells us to do in this very moment, then we're fine, right? We move on to the next line, we move on to the next paragraph, we move on with our lives. If what he asks us to do, we can do at this very moment, don't even think about it. Just moving right along, right? That doesn't mean we're back here. It could be we're here and we have just forgiven somebody or something, an aspect of ourselves, right? So we do what Jesus wants us to do. We can do it, fine. If we can't do it, if we try to let go of the grievance and we cannot let go of the grievance, we're here, right? And then we say, okay, here's my current state. I can't let go of the grievance. Here's what Jesus tells us to give up gladly everything that stands in the way. I discuss this difference with him. I say, Jesus, please help me to look at this with you. So I want to get one more thing in, and that's the workbook. The workbook has a special place in the course because it happens at the beginning of our journey. It happens within this Act 1, usually, that we do the workbook, right? We're usually not here yet, no freaking way, and we're not here, right? We're usually in Act 1 when we read when we do the workbook. The goals of the workbook are as follows. The first one is to counteract the ego's teaching that we do not have a mind, that we are mindless. The ego's most cherished goal is our mindlessness, because if we're mindless, we cannot decide against it, right? Makes sense. In the workbook, we get in touch with our mind, right? We get in touch with what we think every lesson. How do you think? What do you think about this? The mind training includes not only our thoughts, but also the world, right? And then Jesus says, what you think and what you see is the same, right? So the inside and the outside is the same, because the outside is a projection of the inside. When he says in workbook lesson 23, each of your perceptions of external reality is a pictorial representation of your own attack thoughts. He makes that connection. Everything we see on the outside is what we think on the inside. And when we first read that sentence, we completely skip over the attack part, because we have no clue what that means, that the outside world is a pictorial representation of our own attack thoughts. What do you mean? When we get through here, we learn to realize what that means, because we're projecting all the time, right? If we're with the ego, we attack 24/7. There's no other way of doing anything in the ego other than to project our guilt outward. So whatever we see, even if it's a beautiful sunset, is the pictorial representation of our attack thought. We see that in Act 2, we start to realize, whoa, this is what he means, right? I'm attacking all the time because I need to get rid of my guilt all the time. The other aspect of the workbook is that it introduces us to our right mind. Because we're with the ego says, I'm the only mind you have, the only guide you have, and Jesus says, you have the Holy Spirit, you have the right mind. It's in you, it's part of you. You just have blocked it out, right? Pretty much after lesson 221, we are purely in the right mind, establishing the foundation for a more direct communication link with God. Anything starting at lesson 221 is pure right-minded thought. There's no more ego, right? It's pure right-minded thought. But this communication link that we establish here is extremely important, but it will not last, right? It will carry us into this when we realize how little we want to communicate with God, right? That's why the epilogue in the course, in the workbook says, this course is a beginning, not an end, a beginning. The course gets us to here, right? Into this no. And this is where the course ends and Jesus picks us up. And we're going from there with him and giving him all the no's that we can possibly think of, all of our judgments, our hatreds, our fear, our anger, our guilt, our shame. We give him all of that. We look at all of that with him, right? That is already beyond the course. We're still reading the course, but we're already on track where the relationship with Jesus or the Holy Spirit will slowly but surely override the book. The book becomes internalized because the book is the right mind. So we're switching slowly over to the right mind, which means the form of the Course in Miracles will step backwards to let the content come into our lives. That's why no freaking way, because we're so afraid of it, we're gonna fight it. We're gonna fight it until we're in Act 3, when we realize, all right, you know what, I trust you enough now. We can look at the fear of God together and we can finish this journey together. We will know the darkness when we, in this part, we will get to know the darkness, we will get to know the no, all of our fears, hatreds, everything, but we will also get to know the right mind, right? We will get to know the content of the right mind. And Jesus tells us that if we look at the ego, we will also have looked at his, which I'm going to read as a closing. We will get to know the ego, but we will get to know the light as well. We will have judgment-free moments of deep peace. We will experience a deeper love than usual. We will experience a more whole and complete state of being than before. But it will not last until we're in Act 3 and have gone past the fear of God. But we will increasingly become aware of the right mind, while we increasingly become aware of the no freaking way, the wrong mind, right? That is the steps Jesus takes with us. The more light shines in us, the more we can illuminate the darkness of the ego and look at it. I'm thinking, it's amazing what a $30 book can get you, right? This whole thing, this whole life of learning you have a right mind and we have a decision to make, right? $30, not too bad. All right, as a closing, in the text, chapter 11, the introduction to chapter 11, paragraph 4, it says, "My brother, you are part of God and part of me. When you have at last looked at the ego's foundation without shrinking, you will have also looked upon ours. I come to you from our Father to offer you everything again. Do not refuse it in order to keep a dark cornerstone hidden, for its protection will not save you. I give you the lamp, and I will go with you. You will not take this journey alone. I will lead you to your true Father, who hath need of you as I have. Will you not answer the call of love with joy?" Thanks for watching.